Lady Caroline Ainsworth walked up the marble steps of Devereux House the way she did everything, slowly, deliberately, and without ever once looking down at her own feet. Behind her, a hansom cab rattled away into the November fog. Ahead of her, candlelight blazed from every tall window of the house she had been formally invited to attend, against the better judgment of half the ton. She counted the steps as she climbed them. 23, the same as last time, the same as the time before that. At the top, the footman bowed lower than he needed to. He had been in service 41 years, and he knew which guests Lady Devereux liked, and which she merely tolerated. Lady Caroline Ainsworth, 28 years old, 6 unsuccessful seasons behind her, no engagement before her, was the most spectacularly unmarried woman in London. The footman bowed lower because he could not think of any other apology to offer her. Caroline did not notice him, or chose not to. She handed her cloak to the second footman, smoothed the front of her gown, bottle green silk, 3 seasons out of fashion, perfectly fitted, and stepped through the great double doors into the warmth of the Devereux drawing room. The conversation did not stop. It dipped, the way conversation always dipped when she entered a room, and then rose again, slightly forced, slightly louder. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lady Marston turn toward Mrs. Allardyce and whisper something behind a fan. From the other corner, she saw Penelope Moswell, Penelope, who had been her closest friend at Miss Whitcomb's school and was now engaged to marry Caroline's former fiancé, pretend with great effort that she had not seen Caroline at all. Caroline did not look around. She knew exactly which way to go. She had been to Devereux House 36 times in the past 6 years, and she had a system. The small East Salon, where the older women drank ratafia and the younger men did not bother going. There she could stand near the second window from the left, hold a glass of something tepid, and survive the evening by being precisely as invisible as the carpet. Tonight, however, the small East Salon was already occupied. Tonight, Lord Marcus Whitfield, her former fiancé, the man who had broken their engagement 6 years ago by means of a letter delivered while she was at her morning prayers, had decided to greet her in the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, one hand on the gilded plaster, a glass of claret tilted in the other. He had grown stouter in 6 years. His cheeks held a fine red lace of broken capillaries that the candlelight made worse. He was smiling, the way a man smiles when he has been waiting half an hour for the chance to speak. "Lady Caroline." He raised his glass. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The air around him had already arranged itself into an audience. 6 years. 6 years, and I have not yet had the pleasure. "Lord Whitfield." Caroline curtsied, exactly as deeply as protocol required, not a hair more. "Tell me." Marcus took a sip of his claret. The lace at his throat trembled with the swallow. "Tell me, after all this time, still no husband?" The room behind him heard it. The room behind him had been waiting for it. A laugh started somewhere, small, breathy, the laugh of a person who was relieved that someone else had said the unsayable. Then a second laugh. Then a low, rolling laugh from a cluster of men by the punch bowl. Penelope Moswell pressed her glove to her mouth and stared at the ceiling. Caroline did not move. She did not blink. She had practiced this stillness in her bedroom mirror for 6 years, and then a voice spoke from somewhere behind her right shoulder. Quiet, unhurried, almost bored. And the room went silent the way a room goes silent when a single sound makes every other sound feel suddenly very small. Lady Ainsworth. The voice was male, low, and entirely indifferent to the audience that had just been laughing. "Forgive the intrusion. Your steward at the West India docks sent word at 4 o'clock. The Bombay shipment cleared customs. The cardamom is on the bonded barge as we speak." Caroline turned slowly. She had practiced this turn, too. She turned the way one turns a key in a lock that has not been opened in a long time, with a pressure that is mostly patience. Behind her stood Theodore Ashbourne, the 8th Duke of Ashbourne, in evening black and a waistcoat the color of old wine. He had a folded slip of paper in his gloved hand, and the kind of expression a man wears when he has just remembered something dull and necessary in the middle of a pleasant conversation. He looked, in fact, exactly like a man delivering a business message. He did not look at Marcus Whitfield at all. "Your Grace." Caroline took the slip of paper from his fingers. Her own hand did not tremble. "I had not expected the news this evening." "The bonded warehouse closes at 6. I thought you would wish to know before the dancing." Theo bowed, to her only, and stepped neatly half a pace closer, which had the effect of placing his shoulder between Caroline and Marcus Whitfield without appearing to do anything of the kind. "Lady Devereux mentioned you would be in attendance. I came to congratulate Lord Whitfield on his engagement." He turned then, very slightly, and looked at Marcus for the first time. It was not a long look. It lasted perhaps 2.5 seconds, but Marcus Whitfield, who had been laughing one breath earlier, had gone the precise color of skimmed milk under his powder, and the hand holding the claret had begun a small, embarrassing tremor. Your Grace." Marcus straightened. The gilded plaster behind him creaked under the sudden withdrawal of his shoulder. I was not aware that you and Lady Caroline were." "Were what?" Theo asked. The word was a stone dropped into a still pond. "Acquainted. Lady Ainsworth and I have been business associates for 3 years and 7 months." Theo said it the way he might have said the date of the Battle of Trafalgar, as a fact already known to every educated person in the room. "I would have thought it common knowledge." It was not common knowledge. It had been, in fact, the most carefully kept secret in London. But the room behind Marcus had now stopped pretending not to listen. The cluster of men by the punch bowl had turned bodily. Penelope Moswell had lowered her glove from her mouth. Lady Marston had stopped whispering to Mrs. Allardyce mid-sentence. Caroline tucked the folded slip of paper into the embroidered reticule at her wrist. The motion was small. The motion was deliberate. The motion was, to anyone who could read it, the motion of a woman closing a ledger. "Lord Whitfield." She inclined her head, a courtesy precisely the depth of his rank, and not a hair more. "I will not detain you from your guests. Please convey my regards to Lady Penelope on her engagement. I am sure she will be very—" She paused. "Comfortable." The word was perfectly chosen. The word made Penelope Moswell flinch. Caroline turned without waiting for Marcus's reply, and she walked away. Into the long gallery, past the Steinway piano nobody could play, past the portrait of the late Earl that watched everyone, past the cluster of stunned listeners who would now spend the rest of the evening pretending they had not just heard what they had just heard. Theo fell into step beside her, his gloves folded once over the cuff of his coat, his stride matched precisely to hers. Well, his voice was so low only she could hear it. That was efficient. "I did not ask you to do that." "I am aware." "I had a system for tonight." "I am aware of that too." "Your Grace." Caroline stopped at the door of the small library, one hand on the brass handle. "Why are you here?" Theo did not answer at once. He looked, instead, at her hand on the door. The hand that had not trembled. The hand that had taken the slip of paper without a single shake. The hand that he had watched sign 47 contracts in 3 years and 7 months, and that he had not, in all that time, ever once been permitted to touch. Because Charles Whitfield was at the company offices yesterday afternoon. Theo's voice was even quieter now. And he was asking questions about your contracts. Specific questions. The kind of questions that suggest he intends to do something about them. Caroline's hand on the door went very still. "Then we should talk." She pushed the library door open. "Come in. Close it behind you." The Devereux Library smelled of old leather, beeswax, and the faint, sweet rot of October apples in a bowl on the writing desk. A single oil lamp burned on the mantelpiece. The fire had been banked, but not extinguished. 3 orange coals beneath a layer of grey ash, the way a butler banked a fire when he expected a guest to find their way to the room. Caroline closed the door. She did not lock it. She walked instead to the writing desk and sat down with the slow, deliberate composure of a woman who has learned that to sit is sometimes more dangerous than to stand. Theo did not sit. He moved to the fire and set his folded gloves on the marble mantel beside the lamp. He did not turn around. "How specific?" Caroline asked. He asked the names of every captain currently transporting cardamom under the Whitfield and Company flag. He asked which docks the bonded barges put in at. He asked who paid the warehouse fees in Wapping. He asked which solicitor in Lincoln's Inn handled contracts for the importer. Did he get the names? He got mine. Caroline absorbed that. She set her gloved hands flat on the desk and looked, for a long moment, at the embroidered initials on her reticule. C.A. and at the slip of paper she had taken from him a moment before. He will go to my father next. He has already written to your father. The letter went south on this morning's mail coach to Hampshire. I had it copied at the post office in Holborn. I have a copy in my breast pocket. Would you like to read it now, or after you have eaten supper? Caroline turned her head, slowly, and looked at him for the first time since the door had closed. He was still facing the fire. The orange coals threw a low, warm light up the side of his face, across the line of his jaw, the slight stubble he had not had time to shave before the ball, the small, white scar at the corner of his mouth that he had earned at Eton when he was 12 and had never bothered to explain. She had known this man for 3 years and 7 months. She had signed 47 contracts in his presence. She had eaten cold luncheons with him at the warehouse, in the cellar, at a deal table that smelled of pepper. She had watched him negotiate freight rates with Dutch captains who spoke no English, and had seen him bow to her own dock foreman with the same gravity he gave to dukes. She had never once, in all that time, asked him why a man of his rank and fortune was helping a woman like her. She was not going to ask him now, either. After supper. She picked up the slip of paper and folded it again, smaller this time, until it was the size of a calling card. First we deal with Lady Whitfield. She will corner me in the dining room. She's been planning it since the engagement was announced. Lady Whitfield is a small problem. Lady Whitfield is the wife of the man who is trying to ruin me. Theo turned, then. He turned slowly, the way she had turned in the doorway, with that pressure that is mostly patience, and he looked at her across the small library with an expression she could not have named in any of her ledgers. Lady Whitfield, he said quietly, is a small problem because you have already won. She does not know it yet, but she will know it before the soup is served. I have absolute confidence in your ability to make the entire dining room watch her discover it. The fire popped softly. One of the orange coals broke and resettled. Caroline did not smile. Caroline did not smile in public, ever, and the library was a public room because the door was unlocked. But something in the line of her shoulders eased by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. Your Grace. Yes. Why are you here? Truly. Theo picked up his gloves from the mantel. He did not put them on. Because I do not trust Charles Whitfield not to put a bad man on the road to your warehouse tonight. And I do not intend to let you go back to Wapping alone. The garden at Devereux House had been laid out in the French style, which meant that everything was geometric and nothing was alive. In November, with the box hedges trimmed to bone and the gravel pathways frosted, it looked like a chessboard waiting for an opening move. Caroline walked it with both hands tucked into the ermine muff Mrs. Hobbs had insisted she carry. Theo walked half a step behind her, on her left side, between her and the dark shrubbery against the south wall. The supper bell would ring in 15 minutes. My father will not believe Charles Whitfield's letter. Caroline's breath fogged in the cold. The path crunched under her embroidered slippers. My father has not opened a letter from Hampshire neighbours since 1813. He will give it to his secretary, who will give it to my mother, who will burn it because she does not approve of any letter that mentions me by name. That is convenient. It is not convenient. It is the only reason I have lasted this long. She stopped at the centerpiece of the garden. a stone fountain in the shape of 3 nymphs holding a basin. The water in the basin had frozen in the afternoon, and was now a flat, glassy disk that caught the lamplight from the house. Caroline looked down into it and saw, faintly, her own face. The broad, pale brow, the dark hair coiled at the back of her head, the mouth that did not smile, because she had stopped letting it.
Your Grace, Theodore. I beg your pardon? My given name is Theodore. After 3 years and 7 months, I think we may dispense with Your Grace inside this garden, at least. Caroline did not look up from the frozen basin. Her gloved fingers tightened a 1/4 of an inch on the inside of the muff. Theodore. She said it as if she were testing the weight of a coin. Why did you say it was common knowledge? Because I'm tired of hiding it. You agreed to hide it. I agreed to hide it because you required it. I have never agreed to like it. I required it. Caroline finally looked up. The frost had bitten her cheekbones the color of crushed berries. Her eyes, grey, with a dark ring at the rim of the iris, were entirely level. I required it because the moment the Tun learns that the Duke of Ashbourne is the silent partner in a spice import operation owned by an unmarried 28-year-old woman, they will reach exactly one conclusion. And that conclusion will be wrong. And it will follow me into every drawing room in England. And it will make me precisely the thing I have spent 6 years not being. Which is? A woman who survived her ruin by becoming someone's mistress. Theo was silent for 2 breaths. The garden was silent for 2 breaths. Somewhere inside the house, an oboe started up, very faintly, the first warm notes of a country dance. I will not, he began. I know you will not. I have always known you will not. The Tun will not care what you have not done. The Tun will only care what they can be made to believe. And Charles Whitfield is very, very good at making them believe. The wind moved across the box hedges. A scatter of dry beech leaves blew across the gravel like small running feet. Caroline did not move. I will not marry to be respectable. Her voice was very low, very even. The voice of a woman reciting a list she had recited to herself many times in the dark of her own bedroom. I will not pretend my work is a hobby. I will not need a man's name on my contracts to make my contracts legal. I will not take a husband to disprove a rumor. I will not. She stopped. What? Theo asked. I will not pretend, in front of you, that I have not thought about marrying you. The sentence dropped into the cold garden and settled there like a stone hitting the bottom of the frozen basin. I think about it every Tuesday afternoon when you bring the customs ledger, Caroline said. The words came out of her in the same voice she used to dictate freight invoices. I think about it on Thursday mornings when you sit on the edge of the deal table in the cellar and read me the prices from Antwerp. I think about it in November, because the warehouse in November smells of the cardamom we are about to lose to the cold. I think about it, and then I do not do anything about it, because I will not be the one who asked. I will not give Marcus Whitfield the satisfaction of having been right. Caroline. Theo's voice had dropped to almost nothing. That is the first time you have said my name without the title. It will not be the last. The supper bell rang inside the house. A small, bright brass sound that broke the air like a porcelain cup dropped on a marble floor. Caroline turned away from the fountain. We will go in separately. I will go first. You will count to 120, and then you will follow. And we will not be seen speaking to each other again until after Lady Whitfield has done her worst at the supper table. She walked back toward the house. Theo did not stop her. The dining room at Devereux House sat 62 for supper. Caroline had counted on her first visit and had never had occasion to recount. The long table ran the length of the room, beneath 3 chandeliers, and the silver had been polished so hard it threw little flickering ghosts across the white damask cloth. There were 41 footmen tonight. 41 footmen for 62 guests.
Lady Devereux had outdone herself. Her place card had been put exactly where she expected it, between two elderly widowers who were both deaf, halfway down the table on the south side, where she could be safely ignored by everyone above the salt. She slid into her chair, with the same precise economy of motion she used to slide a ledger into a strongbox. For 1 minute, the room behaved itself. Then, Lady Lavinia Whitfield rose from her seat at the foot of the table, the seat of honor, opposite Lady Devereux at the head, and tapped her dessert spoon twice against the rim of her wineglass. The room fell silent immediately. "My friends," Lady Whitfield's voice carried beautifully. She had trained it for parlor recitations as a girl. "Before we begin, I wish to say a word about the engagement we are celebrating this evening. My son Marcus and dear Penelope have known each other since childhood, and their union is the answer to a mother's prayer. I wish them every happiness. And I wish, also, to remind us all that some women find the path to a husband sooner than others, and some women never find it at all." There was a small, anxious laugh from somewhere near the head of the table. It died very quickly. Lady Whitfield turned her head, slowly, and looked directly down the long, polished length of the white damask at Lady Caroline Ainsworth. "My dear Caroline." Her voice was the kind of voice that had been polished by 40 years of practice in saying cruel things in pleasant tones. "I do hope you will not feel out of place tonight. I know how difficult it must be for a woman of your particular history to attend the engagement ball of a man she once expected to marry. We none of us forget that you would have been my daughter once. I am sure you take comfort in your charitable works." Caroline set her soup spoon down, very gently, against the rim of her bowl. The room was now so silent, she could hear the candle wax drip onto the brass candle dishes. She did not stand. "Lady Whitfield." Caroline's voice was perfectly clear. It carried to the far end of the table without effort. "Forgive me. I am a little uncertain of your meaning. Which charitable works did you have in mind?" Lady Whitfield blinked. She had not expected a question. "Why, your needlework, my dear. The orphan's linen. I'm told you sew very prettily." "I do not sew. I have not sewn since I was 16. I find I have no aptitude for it." Caroline's gloved hands rested perfectly still on either side of her bowl. "What other charitable works did you have in mind?" The parish flowers, then. I was certain Mrs. Allardyce told me. I do not arrange flowers either." "My dear," Lady Whitfield's voice had begun, very faintly, to thin. "I confess myself at a loss as to how you fill your days, then." "I import spices, Lady Whitfield." Caroline said it the way another woman might have said, "I read Mr. Wordsworth's verse." "Cardamom, principally, and black pepper, and a little cinnamon, from Bombay, by way of the Cape, on bonded barges that put in at the West India docks. I've done so for 3 years and 7 months. I have 47 active contracts. The Bombay shipment cleared customs at 4 o'clock this afternoon, in fact. I was informed of it shortly after I arrived this evening." She paused. The pause was perfectly measured. "Did your husband not mention it to you?" "I was given to understand he was making inquiries about my contracts at the company offices yesterday afternoon. I had assumed he intended to discuss the matter with you." The clergyman from Sussex made a small, involuntary sound, like a man who has just been struck on the back of the head with a soup spoon. Lady Whitfield's mouth opened. Lady Whitfield's mouth closed. Lady Whitfield put one hand on the back of her chair, as if she had felt the floor move, and then, very carefully, she sat back down. The dessert spoon was still in her other hand. She set it down on the table beside her water glass, with the small, careful precision of a woman who has just discovered that she is no longer in possession of her own dining room. At the head of the table, Lady Devereux, who had been watching the entire exchange with the bright, pleased eyes of a woman who hosts these dinners precisely for moments like this, lifted her own glass. "To the engagement of Lord Whitfield, and Lady Penelope Moswell. Her voice was very dry. And to the surprising versatility of Lady Caroline Ainsworth's accomplishments. 60 guests lifted their glasses. 2, Lady Whitfield and her son, did not. Caroline raised her own glass, exactly the height required by courtesy, and not a hair more. She did not look down the table at Theodore Ashburn, who had taken his seat at Lady Devereux's right hand, and was now drinking his wine with the small, satisfied silence of a man who had just watched a woman win a war without raising her voice. She did not need to look. She could feel him looking. The hansom cab put her down at the corner of Wapping High Street and Crayle's Yard at 23 minutes past midnight. Caroline paid the driver, 6pence over the fare because he had slowed at the patch of dark by the Coopers where she had warned him to slow, and stood for a moment on the cobbles in the cold. The river smelled, the way it always smelled in November. Brackish water, tar, hemp rope, coal smoke, and the very faint salt breath of the Thames at low tide. Behind her, in the dark, a single chain rattled as a barge moved against its mooring. Ahead of her, the warehouse rose 3 stories into the fog. Dark brick, dark windows, the iron-bound door in the center, and above the door, barely visible in the lamplight from the gas standard at the corner, the painted sign that read, Cartwright & Sons, Importers, in faded white capitals. Cartwright & Sons did not exist. Cartwright & Sons had not existed since 1819. The sign had been Theo's idea, 3 years and 7 months ago, in a coffeehouse in Lincoln's Inn. Caroline lifted the heavy iron key from her reticule and turned it in the lock. The door swung in on oiled hinges. The cellar was warm. It was always warm. Mrs. Hobbs's nephew Tom slept on a cot beside the great iron stove on the eastern side of the cellar. A boy of 19, with a stevedore's shoulders and a heavy ash walking stick Caroline had paid for, and prayed he would never need to use. He sat up when she came down the steps, blinked, and reached for his coat. "Stay." Caroline raised her gloved hand. "I am not staying long. I came to see the manifest." "He's already here, miss." "Who is?" "The Duke." Tom's voice was respectful, but unsurprised. "He came in by the river door at 11:30. He's at the deal table. He brought lamps." Caroline went down the rest of the steps. The cellar was a long, low, vaulted room of London stock brick, with the great iron stove at one end and the deal table at the other. The deal table was 16 feet long. Tonight it held 3 brass oil lamps, the open customs ledger from the Bombay shipment, a brass bowl of ground cardamom that Caroline used as a sample for buyers, and the Duke of Ashbourne, in his shirt sleeves, with his evening coat folded over the back of a chair. He had not heard her come in. He was bent over the ledger with a pencil in his hand, marking off entries against a list of dock numbers, and his hair, usually combed back so neatly that it looked carved, had fallen forward into his eyes. Caroline stood at the foot of the steps for 2 breaths, watching him. He was, she realized, the only man she had ever invited into this room. Not her father, not Marcus, not even Mrs. Hobbs's nephew Tom. She crossed the brick floor, set her muff and her reticule on the corner of the table, and unpinned the bottle-green silk gown's high collar with 2 efficient fingers. Theo looked up. "You should be in your bed." "I will be, after I see the dock numbers." 11 of the 13 are in. 2 will not put in until Wednesday morning because the harbour master at Gravesend is a fool. I have already sent a man down by the night coach to wake him up. Caroline came around the deal table and stood at his elbow. The cardamom in the brass bowl was very strong. The brass oil lamps threw a warm yellow light up under his jaw. "Theodore, you said in the garden you would not let me come back to Wapping alone." "I did." "You did not come with me. You went ahead of me." "I did, because if I had come with you in the carriage, I would have asked you a question I do not yet have the right to ask. And I have decided, recently in your garden, when you said the word marrying out loud, that I am not going to ask you that question,
until I have made the world safer for the answer." Caroline did not move. The lamp closest to her hand made a small, contented sound as the wick adjusted itself. "The world is not going to become safer. Then I will make it less dangerous. There is a difference." She put her gloved hand very lightly on the open page of the customs ledger. Her hand was perhaps 2 inches from his. She did not bridge the 2 inches. She had a system. "Theodore, stay until morning. Sleep on the cot by the stove. Tom will sit up by the river door. I will sleep in the office above. In the morning, before the docks open, we will go to Lincoln's Inn together, and we will see my solicitor. And then we will go to the company offices. And then we will see what kind of question the world allows you to ask me by tomorrow night." "Yes." She picked up her muff and her reticule, climbed the wooden stair to the office above, and shut the door behind her with the same small, perfectly composed click she had used on the library door at Devereux House. In the cellar below, the Duke of Ashbourne sat down very slowly on the bench by the deal table, put his elbows on his knees, and pressed the heels of both hands into his eyes for a long, long moment. She woke to the smell of bread. Tom had baked a loaf in the iron stove at 5:30. It was the first thing Caroline understood as she came down the wooden stair into the cellar. The second thing she understood was that Theo was already gone. His evening coat was no longer over the chair. There was a folded slip of paper on the corner of the deal table, weighted with the brass cardamom bowl. The handwriting on the outside said only, C.A. She unfolded it. "Customs House at 9. I've asked Mr. Pelham to meet us with the contracts. I will be at Lincoln's Inn until 8, then at the Bedford Coffee House. Eat. T.A." Caroline read it twice. She refolded it very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of the bottle green silk gown which she had not, after all, taken off the night before. Tom brought her bread and a tin cup of black tea. She had eaten exactly 3 bites when the bell above the river door rang. It was not Theo. Theo would have come in without ringing. Tom went to the door. There was a low, terse exchange. Tom came back across the brick floor with his face carefully blank. "There's a clerk from the customs house, miss. He says he has a notice for the proprietor of Cartwright & Sons. He says it cannot be left with anyone but the proprietor." "Show him in." The clerk was perhaps 40, with a long, mournful face and a leather satchel he kept very tightly under one arm. He bowed when he saw her, and the bow was slightly too low. Lady Ainsworth." His voice cracked slightly on the title. "I beg pardon. I had been instructed to inquire for the proprietor." "I am the proprietor. What is the notice?" The clerk reached into his satchel and brought out a single, folded sheet of foolscap, sealed with red wax that bore the impression of the East India Company crest. He handed it to her with both hands. Caroline broke the wax. She read the notice once, slowly, the way she read every legal document, from top to bottom, with her gloved finger moving steadily down the page. The notice informed her that, pursuant to a complaint lodged by Charles, Earl of Whitfield, all bonded shipments held under the name of Cartwright & Sons, importers, were suspended, pending an inquiry into the legitimacy of the proprietor's title to the contracts. The inquiry would be held at Leadenhall Street the following Thursday. Until that time, no cardamom, pepper, or cinnamon held under Cartwright & Sons would be released from the bonded warehouse. The Bombay shipment that had cleared customs the previous afternoon was, by the wording of the notice, now sealed. Caroline did not raise her voice. She did not, in fact, allow her face to do anything at all. "Thank you, sir." She handed the notice back to the clerk, who looked at it as if she had handed him a hot kettle. "I will receive a copy of the formal complaint at the Lincoln's Inn chambers of Mr. Edmund Pelham by 10 o'clock this morning. You may inform the Board of Directors that I shall present myself at Leadenhall Street on Thursday next, and that I shall bring with me the complete original ledger of Cartwright & Sons since its founding, and that I shall be accompanied by my solicitor and by my business partner." Your business partner, ma'am?"
His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne. I believe the board is acquainted with him." The clerk's mouth opened. The clerk's mouth closed. The clerk bowed, far more deeply this time, and took his satchel and his terrible piece of foolscap, and went out by the river door at a pace that was not quite running, but was no longer walking. Tom closed the door behind him. Caroline picked up the bread again. She put it down. She walked, very deliberately, to the wall by the iron stove, where the calendar hung on a brass hook, and she counted forward. Today was Saturday. Thursday next was 5 days away. 5 days to keep the cardamom from rotting on a sealed barge in the bonded warehouse. 5 days to assemble her defense. 5 days to persuade 14 company directors that a 28-year-old, unmarried woman had the legal right to own a shipping concern in her own name. 5 days. And then the rest of her life. She put on her cloak. "Tom, send a runner to the Bedford Coffee House. Tell His Grace I am on my way to Lincoln's Inn now. Tell him to bring every contract he has signed for me in the past 3 years and 7 months." Leadenhall Street on a Thursday morning was the loudest street in London. The traffic of carts, the cries of porters carrying tea chests, the clatter of bonded warehouse doors opening and shutting, up and down the length of East India House. All of it merged into a great, low, continuous roar that sounded, Caroline thought, exactly the way ambition sounded when you put your ear to it. She walked up the steps of East India House at 22 minutes to 10, with Mr. Edmund Pelham of Lincoln's Inn on her left and the Duke of Ashbourne on her right. Mr. Pelham was carrying a leather portfolio that contained 68 pages of contract law and 7 sealed letters from masters of bonded warehouses up and down the Thames. Theo was carrying nothing. The boardroom on the second floor was a long, oak-panelled chamber with a great horseshoe table, 14 leather chairs along the curve, and a single witness chair set in the open mouth of the horseshoe, so that the witness was looking at 14 faces all at once. The 14 faces were already in their chairs when Caroline walked in. Lord Charles Whitfield was the third from the left. The chairman, a gentleman of 70 named Sir Hugh Anstruther, who had once served under Caroline's grandfather in Bengal, cleared his throat. "Lady Ainsworth, Mr. Pelham, Your Grace, the board has been convened at the request of the Honourable Lord Whitfield to consider the legitimacy of the holdings registered under Cartwright & Sons, Importers. Lord Whitfield, would you state your complaint?" Charles Whitfield rose from his seat. He was a tall, thin, white-haired man, with the long, careful face of a man who had spent 40 years on boards. His voice was the voice of a man who had never lost a vote. "My complaint is simple, Sir Hugh. It has come to my attention that the Cartwright & Sons holdings, totaling more than £11,000 in the current Bombay shipments, are in fact owned by an unmarried gentlewoman whose father has not been informed of her commercial activities. The contracts were signed under the assumed name of a male proprietor, Mr. Cartwright, who does not exist. I submit that the holdings have been obtained by means of a fraudulent representation, that the contracts are accordingly void, and that the shipments should be forfeit to the company until the matter is resolved by Chancery." He sat down. A small, soft murmur ran along the horseshoe. Sir Hugh Anstruther turned his old grey eyes to Caroline. "Lady Ainsworth, your response?" Caroline sat down in the witness chair. She did not look at Charles Whitfield. She looked, instead, at Sir Hugh. "Sir Hugh, is it the position of this board that an Englishwoman of full age and sound mind may not enter into a binding contract for the import of goods?" Sir Hugh blinked. "It is not, Lady Ainsworth." "Is it the position of this board that an Englishwoman of full age and sound mind requires the consent of her father to enter into a binding contract for the import of goods?" "It is not, Lady Ainsworth. The law is clear. A femme sole, that is, an unmarried woman, has the same contractual capacity as a man." "Then I am at a loss, Sir Hugh, to understand what fraudulent representation Lord Whitfield believes I have made. I have not represented myself as married. I have not represented myself as a man. The contracts of Cartwright & Sons are signed by a Mr. Cartwright, it is true. Mr. Cartwright is the trade name of the firm, a customary practice of importers, as I am sure his lordship knows, since his own family has traded under the name of Whitfield & Company since 1761. Although there has not been a Mr. Whitfield personally signing a contract since the second Earl. The trade name is registered. The trade name is legal. And the principal owner of the trade name, the person with sole signing authority on every contract, is myself. She paused. She let the silence breathe. I have brought with me the complete original ledger of Cartwright & Sons since its founding 3 years and 7 months ago. I have brought every contract bearing my signature, witnessed by His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne, who has been my silent partner since the founding. I have brought the 7 letters from the masters of the bonded warehouses, attesting that the trade name Cartwright & Sons has at all times been understood by the trade to refer to my person. And I have brought, finally, this. She drew from her reticule a folded sheet of paper. This is a letter, dated yesterday morning, from Mr. James Hartwell, the senior clerk at Whitfield & Company, addressed to Lord Whitfield. It is an inventory of Lord Whitfield's own personal cardamom holdings, £1,140 worth, which, by the records of the bonded warehouse at the West India Docks, have been quietly shipped under cover of my own bonded barges for the past 18 months. Lord Whitfield has been using my freight contracts, Sir Hugh. He has been using them because mine are the cheapest on the river. He has been using them under the trade name Cartwright & Sons, knowing perfectly well who Cartwright & Sons is. The murmur along the horseshoe rose by half an octave. Charles Whitfield went very white. He did not stand up. He did not look at Caroline. Sir Hugh Anstruther took the letter from her gloved fingers. He read it. He read it twice. He set it down on the table in front of him, with the same small, careful precision Lady Whitfield had used to set down her dessert spoon at supper the night before. Lord Whitfield. Charles Whitfield's head came up. You will withdraw your complaint, sir. You will withdraw it now, in this room, before the assembled board, and you will withdraw it in writing before noon. You will further write a letter of apology to Lady Ainsworth, which she will keep on file at her solicitor's chambers. You will further refrain from any further inquiry, formal or informal, into the holdings of Cartwright & Sons. Is that clear? Sir Hugh, is that clear, sir? It was not a question. The 14 faces around the horseshoe table were all looking at Charles Whitfield in a particular way. The way 14 men look at a 15th man who has just fallen off the edge of the only ground he had ever stood on. It is clear, Sir Hugh. Then this matter is concluded. The shipment is released. The bonded warehouse will be informed within the hour. Sir Hugh turned his old grey eyes to Caroline one more time. Lady Ainsworth, your grandfather would have been proud of you today. Thank you, Sir Hugh. She rose from the witness chair. She walked, very slowly, the length of the boardroom, past Charles Whitfield, past the 13 other directors, past Mr. Edmund Pelham, who was packing his portfolio with the small, triumphant motions of a solicitor who had not, in the end, needed to use any of the law he had brought. At the door she stopped, and she turned back. Sir Hugh, one thing more. I should like to apply, before I leave this building, for the registration of Cartwright & Sons under my own name, Caroline Ainsworth, sole proprietor, with my partner, His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne, listed openly upon the founding documents. From this day forward, I should prefer that the trade name be honest about who has been keeping it. The chairman of the board of directors of the East India Company smiled, a small, slow, very dry smile that had not, perhaps, been seen on his face in some years. It will be done before noon, Lady Ainsworth. She bowed her head, a quarter of an inch, no more, and she left the boardroom. Theo followed her out into the long oak corridor. He did not speak until they had reached the great staircase above the front hall. There he stopped, and he turned, and he looked at her. Caroline. Theodore. I'm going to ask you a question now. I know. Will you marry me? She looked at him for a long moment. The November light fell through the high, arched window above the staircase and lay across the polished oak in pale gold bars. Not here, Theodore. Ask me at the warehouse. Ask me at the deal table, where you have read me the prices from Antwerp on Thursday mornings for 3 years and 7 months. Ask me with the cardamom on the table between us. Ask me in the place where the question makes sense. They went to Wapping that night. It was past 9 when they arrived. The river fog was thicker than it had been the night before, the kind of fog that turned the gas lamps along Wapping High Street into pale yellow halos and softened every footstep on the cobbles to a rumour. Tom had laid the fire in the great iron stove an hour earlier, and had then taken himself out to the river door and the street outside, and was not, by any reasonable definition, anywhere within the building. Caroline went down the cellar steps first. Theo followed. She had not changed her gown all day. The bottle green silk had been creased and pressed by 12 hours of carriages and corridors and witness chairs, and the high collar was rumpled at the throat, where she had pinned and unpinned it twice. She walked to the deal table. She lit the 3 brass oil lamps with a single taper, the way she had lit them for 3 years and 7 months. She took the brass bowl of cardamom and set it precisely in the center of the table. She turned, finally, and faced him. Ask. Theo crossed the brick floor and stopped on the opposite side of the deal table. The brass lamps threw their warm yellow light up between them. The cardamom was very strong. Caroline Ainsworth, 3 years and 7 months ago, you walked into the coffee house at Lincoln's Inn looking for a silent partner. You had a list of 43 coffeehouse patrons in your reticule. You had crossed off 42 of them already. I was the last name on the list. Why was I the last name on the list? Because you were the only duke. I had been told to start with the dukes, and I had decided, the day I made the list, that I would talk to the dukes last, in case talking to a duke about pepper made me lose my nerve. By the time I reached your name, I had already been told no by an earl, 2 viscounts, a baron, a banker, 3 solicitors, a tea merchant, a lord mayor, and a man who turned out to be selling fraudulent shares in a Welsh canal company. I sat down at your table because you were the last name on the list, and because I had run out of other tables. Do you remember what I said? You said, cardamom is the second most profitable spice in the East India trade. Why are you not also asking me about cinnamon? And I said, because I have not yet learned cinnamon. And you said, then I will teach you cinnamon. When can you start? Yes. Theodore, ask the question. He did not move from his side of the deal table. He set both gloved hands flat on the wood, one on either side of the brass cardamom bowl, the way she had set hers down at supper the night before. Will you marry me, Caroline Ainsworth, on terms that you will set, with your name on every contract, with your warehouse remaining your warehouse, with your solicitor remaining your solicitor, with no expectation that you will alter a single hour of any working day for my sake or for my title, or for the convenience of the ton, with the understanding that I have loved you since the 2nd Tuesday in September of the year I taught you cinnamon, and with the further understanding that if you say no, I will continue to be your silent partner and your friend until I die, but that I am asking, tonight, in this place, because I have decided I do not wish to die without having asked. The cardamom was very strong. Caroline did not move for a count of perhaps 20. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice she had used to set down the spoon at supper, and to read the customs notice that morning, and to recite the negation chain in the geometric garden the night before. It was the voice of Steel Rose. But there was something inside it, very small, that had not been there before. A small, cracked gold thread of warmth that ran through the precision of every word. I will marry you, Theodore, on those terms, on exactly those terms, with my name on every contract and the warehouse remaining mine, and Mr. Pelham remaining my solicitor, and not a single hour of my working day altered for your title or for the ton. And with one further term. Name it. That you will say my name without the title at least once a day until we are buried. Yes. And, Theodore, I have loved you since the second Wednesday in October of the year you taught me cinnamon. I am 1 day later than you, and I have always been 1 day later than you. I should like the record to show it. He came around the deal table. The way he had stepped half a pace closer in the doorway at Devereux House the night before. Quietly, deliberately, with the absolute composure of a man who had been waiting 3 years and 7 months for permission to cross 16 feet of brick floor. He stopped in front of her. He lifted one gloved hand. He did not touch her face. He laid the back of his fingers, very lightly, against the rumpled collar of the bottle green silk gown, over the place where her pulse beat under the high lace, and he held them there for a count of 3. It was the first time in 3 years and 7 months that he had touched her at all. Caroline. Theodore, I'm going to kiss you now. I know. He kissed her. He kissed her once, slowly, with the warm yellow light of the brass lamps on the side of her face, and the smell of cardamom rising from the bowl on the deal table behind them. He kissed her without hurry, without grasping, without any of the things she had spent 6 years steeling herself against. He kissed her the way a man closes a long, important book at the end of a long, important chapter, and then opens a new one. When he stepped back, the small white scar at the corner of his mouth was visible in the lamplight, and her gloved fingers were resting, very lightly, on the dark wool of his sleeve. In the morning, she said, we will go to Hampshire, and we will tell my father. He will not understand. We will tell him anyway. And then we will come back to the warehouse, and we will read the prices from Antwerp. Yes. Theodore, do not let me let go of your sleeve until the lamps go out. I have practiced not touching you for 3 years and 7 months. I should like to practice the opposite for at least an hour before I have to be Steel Rose again in the morning. 6 months later, on a warm afternoon in May, the Duchess of Ashbourne stood at the deal table in the cellar of the warehouse in Wapping, with the bottle green silk gown folded over the back of a chair beside her, and a working pinafore of plain, dark calico tied over her morning dress. The pinafore was new. The pinafore had been a gift from Mrs. Hobbs, who had finally accepted that Lady Ashburn was going to spend Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings at the warehouse for the rest of her natural life, and had decided that she might as well do so without ruining her good gowns. Caroline had a pencil in one hand and the customs ledger open in front of her. She was checking off the May shipments from Bombay. 14 barges, all on time, the largest single delivery of cardamom Cartwright & Sons had ever signed for. The brass bowl of cardamom in the center of the deal table was new too. The old one had cracked along its rim during the move and had been retired to the office above. The new one was Theo's wedding gift to her, a hammered silver bowl with a small inscription on the underside that read, in tiny capital letters, "For the day the world allowed the question." Across the deal table from her, Theo was reading the prices from Antwerp aloud from a folded newspaper. He was in his shirt sleeves. His hair had fallen forward into his eyes, the way it had on the night she had first stood at the foot of the cellar steps and watched him without his knowing. She did not stop him. She had stopped letting herself look up from the ledger when he read aloud, because she had discovered that she could no longer look up from the ledger when he read aloud without losing her place. The river door rang. It was Tom, with a folded letter. He brought it across the brick floor to the deal table and laid it beside the silver cardamom bowl. And Caroline saw the seal at once. Red wax, the impression of the East India Company crest, the same seal that had come into the warehouse on the morning of the suspension 5 months ago. She broke the seal. She read the letter. She set it very carefully against the brass oil lamp at the corner of the deal table, where the warm May light from the high window above the river door would fall on it. Theodore, Sir Hugh Anstruther has died. He has named me to fill his seat on the board of directors of the East India Company. The vote was held last week. It was unanimous, except for Lord Whitfield, who is no longer a sitting member. Theo set the newspaper down on the deal table beside the customs ledger. Caroline, will you accept it? She turned her face up to the warm May light from the high window above the river door. The light caught the small grey ring at the rim of the iris of her eye, and the very faint, very fine lines at the corner of her mouth that had not, in fact, been there 6 years ago, when Marcus Whitfield had broken their engagement by means of a letter delivered while she was at her morning prayers. I will accept it, on terms that my name will appear on the board's register as Caroline Ainsworth, not as the Duchess of Ashbourne, not as the Honourable Lady Ashbourne, not as Lady Caroline. Caroline Ainsworth, sole proprietor of Cartwright & Sons, the name I have used in this room for 3 years and 11 months. They will not object. I know. She picked up the pencil again. She picked up the customs ledger. She did not look up from the page when she said the next thing, because there are some things that are too important to say while looking at the person you are saying them to. Theodore, the cardamom in the new bowl. Thank you for the inscription. You are welcome, Caroline. The river outside moved against the wall of the warehouse. Somewhere up the high street, a barge bell rang at 3 o'clock. The brass cardamom bowl held the last of the morning sun in its hammered silver lip, and Caroline Ainsworth, the Duchess of Ashbourne, the second largest holder of pepper futures in England, the newest member of the board of directors of the East India Company, the most spectacularly unmarried woman in London 6 months ago, the woman who had counted 23 steps up to Devereux House and walked up them without looking down at her own feet, went back to the page of the ledger she had been keeping for 3 years and 11 months, and she carried on. Some women find their freedom in the place where everyone else expects them to be hidden. Some women learn to count their own steps because no one else is willing to count them for them. And some women, the rarest, the steeliest, the ones who walk into rooms that have arranged themselves into audiences and refuse to be made small by the laughter waiting at the door, discover that the man who has been standing behind them all along has been waiting, with absolute patience, for permission to step forward and stand at their side. If you have ever been the most spectacularly unmarried woman in any room, and you have ever wondered whether the world will allow you to be both who you are and who you love, then you already know how Caroline Ainsworth felt when the Duke of Ashbourne crossed 16 feet of brick floor in a cellar in Wapping. Tell me, in the comments, which line in this story made you hold your breath? And if you would like to hear more stories like this one, where the woman everyone wrote off becomes the woman everyone watches walk away, please consider subscribing to Adrian's Fireside Stories, New Tales by the Fire